Breaking tonight, a battle of wills between our new president and our neighbor to the south as President Trump doubles down on the border wall. Now tonight, President Trump raising the stakes once again. I'm Martha McCallum. Good evening, everybody. This is day 7. So Mexico's president, under siege at home, balked at any suggestion that they would pay the billions of dollars that it will take to build the border wall. Mr. Trump then responded on Twitter, writing this: "If Mexico is unwilling to pay for the badly needed wall, then it would be better to cancel the upcoming meeting." Hours later, the Mexican president did just that. Mr. Trump holding his ground.
I've said many times that the American people will not pay for the wall. The president of Mexico and myself have agreed to cancel our planned meeting scheduled for next week. Unless Mexico is going to treat the United States fairly, with respect, such a meeting would be fruitless, and I want to go a different route.
A short time ago, the White House suggesting that one option they're considering would be for Mexico to pay for the border wall by imposing a 20% tax on Mexican goods coming into this country. In moments, we'll be joined by Deputy Assistant to the President, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She will give us the latest from the White House tonight. But first, we go to our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. Good evening, John.
Hey, Martha, another interesting day here at the White House. You know, up until now, the feud between Donald Trump and Enrique Peña Nieto had simply been a feud between a presidential candidate and a world leader. But now that Donald Trump has become President Trump, it's escalated into a full-blown diplomatic incident with the two leaders canceling a summit that was planned for Tuesday. It all started this past Tuesday when President Trump announced his policy, signed the executive order to build a wall. Last night, Peña Nieto went out on Mexican national television to denounce the whole idea. Then the two leaders got into a Twitter war, as you pointed out just a moment ago. Then today in Philadelphia, President Trump refusing to back down at all to Peña Nieto, saying Mexico will indeed pay for the wall. Listen.
Most illegal immigration is coming from our southern border. I've said many times that the American people will not pay for the wall, and I've made that clear to the government of Mexico.
Well, as all of this developed today, it delayed the signing of a proposed executive order on so-called extreme vetting that was initially going to happen tomorrow. Then they were going to move it up to today, and then everything kind of got delayed until at least Saturday, it looks like now. But when he does finally get to this executive order, it will implement a 30-day ban on visa entries from countries that are hotbeds of terrorism. It'll impose a 120-day moratorium on admitting refugees into the United States. It will impose an indefinite ban on Syrian refugees, create safe zones in Syria for them to stay in the meantime, and then implement a process of extreme vetting. President Trump insisting that this measure is critical to America's national security.
We're going to have extreme vetting in all cases, and I mean extreme. And we're not letting people in if we think there's even a little chance of some problem.
And Martha, at the very top of this, coming back to the Mexico spat, you mentioned this idea of a 20% border tax to pay for the wall. The way that that was proposed earlier in the day, it looked like the White House got a little too far out over its skis, suggesting that that's what President Trump was thinking about doing now that Peña Nieto was saying that he's not going to pay for the wall or come here on Tuesday. A lot of people took that as the opening shot in a potential trade war. So this afternoon, Sean Spicer, the press secretary, invited us, a bunch of us into his office to say, whoa, that's just one thing that we're thinking about. It could be combined with a lot of other things. At one point, Reince Priebus popped his head into the door and said, we're thinking about a whole buffet of options here. So they're really trying to walk back quickly this idea of a 20% border tax leveled as a punitive tariff to pay for the wall. Martha?
Yeah. It's fascinating. I want to play a soundbite from President Trump today in Philadelphia, where he started to sort of wrap his arms around this idea with Paul Ryan right next to him. Let's play that.
Well, we're working on a tax reform bill that will reduce our trade deficits, increase American exports, and will generate revenue from Mexico that will pay for the wall if we decide to go that route.
So, I mean, the question, John, is what the back and forth is here. Is there an effort underway to sort of help President Peña Nieto save face a little bit so that he can walk towards them enough to put something together here?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, right now it seems to be at a level of he said, and oh yeah, well, take that. We're not sure how this is all going to turn out, but I will tell you, though, Martha, that the relationship between the United States and Mexico is far too important for this feud to go on very long. And plans are already being made to sort of regroup and sort of reassess and readjust and get those two leaders back together again. And now the White House is saying, hey, it's not the Mexican government per se that is going to pay for the wall. It could be done in a number of different ways. What the president just mentioned there about a comprehensive tax reform package, there's something in the Republican tax plan, these border transfer payments, that would help pay for the wall, but not sticking them, not only sticking the government with the bill, but doing it in a number of different ways where revenue derived from trade with Mexico somehow pays for the wall, which may indeed give Peña Nieto enough of a face-saving measure to get on board with this plan.
All right, we will see. John, thank you very much. So breaking tonight, moments ago, President Trump championing the ideas of what's going on at the border. We're going to talk about the administration angle as well for all of this. I'm joined by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Deputy Assistant to the President and Principal Deputy Press Secretary. Sarah, welcome. Great to have you here tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Martha.
So we were just listening to John Roberts. He was talking about the latest iterations of how, paying for the border wall is going to work. Can you get us up to speed on whether or not this 20% border tax is something that the president can get behind?
Look, right now we're talking about a lot of different ideas. Nothing is a set policy. That's just one idea that we're throwing out there. We're going to be talking to a lot of people, members of Congress and others, to look for different ideas. That's one of them. And again, it's not a set policy, but something we're certainly considering.
So in terms of when that meeting might take place, when he might sit down with the president of Mexico, just give me a sense of what your feeling at the White House is about how all of this went down.
I know there was a lot of back and forth discussion. I think the president made it pretty clear it was a mutual decision not to go ahead with the meeting. And right now we're focused on a lot of activity that's been going on at the White House. The president's being incredibly engaged and active in the last 4 days of officially taking office. And he's going to continue to be active and engaged throughout this process and continue making big and bold moves.
Has there been any dialogue, any further dialogue between the Mexican government and the United States government today on this?
I don't think, as far as I know, not since the meeting was decided that it wouldn't go forward as planned, but I know that we'll probably have lots of conversations with Mexico over the coming weeks and months.
No doubt. In terms of the extreme vetting, there was a draft of that was circulated, and I'm just curious if you can characterize for us when you think we're going to hear more on that policy and what we can expect at this point it will include.
Right now that's still being ironed out. There's a reason that it wasn't signed and announced, and that's because we want to make sure we get everything right. We're being very thorough throughout this process, but we have gotten a ton accomplished this first week. I think we've probably gotten more done in these first 4 days than Barack Obama got done in his entire 8 years. We've got a lot of work left to do, and we're going to continue working on that and make big announcements over the next few days.
Well, there's no doubt as we're keeping track of the first 100 days that a lot of boxes have already been checked off with a lot of campaign promises, and the pace has been just incredible and historic when you compare it to any presidency that we have seen so far. And as I just mentioned to you as we were coming to you tonight, we have a tweet from President Trump which says that the Miami-Dade mayor has dropped his sanctuary policy. Right decision, says the president. Strong exclamation point. What can you tell us about that?
I mean, I think this is a huge moment. I think it shows the type of president that Donald Trump is and the type of effect he's having on this country. That is a major moment and a big victory for the president tonight.
So I also want to talk to you about the March for Life, which is obviously a very big event, and it's an event that we have not seen the White House involved in 8 years. We know that Kellyanne Conway is going to be part of that, speaking at that, Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States as well. Talk to me about the moment that this represents for this White House, Sarah.
Look, I think it's one of the greatest contrast moments that we have between this administration and the past administration. This is a president who values life, that understands that the value and the importance of life is what sets us apart from all of the other civilizations out there. This is a big moment for the president, for this administration, and I think it's a really proud moment for America that we have a president so willing to take this bold stand and draw that contrast that we haven't seen from this past administration.
Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah Huckabee Sanders joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you next week in Washington. Thank you very much, Sarah. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me, Martha. You too.
All right, so this immigration fight is very much front and center. Mark Krikorian, Executive Director at the Center for Immigration Studies, and Juan Williams, co-host of The Five, joining us this evening. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you both here.
Great
Thanks,
to be
Martha.
here.
Mark, let me start with you on this. This news from the mayor of Miami, Miami-Dade mayor, dropping the sanctuary policy. Details are still coming in on this, but that's a pretty big development.
Yeah, I think it is, and because the idea of sanctuary cities really are indefensible. Sanctuary city is not a place where the cops don't ask your immigration status. They don't really do that anywhere. What a sanctuary city does is when it gets a request for someone they arrested, that immigration wants him because he's deportable, that they let that person go instead. That's inexcusable. And there are going to be some hard cases like San Francisco and New York that are going to stick to their guns. So the administration has got some work ahead of it, but a lot of jurisdictions are going to, change their tune, I think, pretty quickly.
Well, when you have the threat of federal money being withheld, Juan, that may make some of these mayors sort of look at this whole thing a little differently.
It might, Martha, and I guess that's what's behind the action in Miami. But what we've seen so far is that the mayors of the big cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, D.C., even some of the smaller cities, Syracuse, Austin, and the like, have said that they plan to fight this. That they also point to that Congress is not allowed to use federal funds or limits on federal funds to coerce the states into doing their bidding. That's not legal. So there's a question about how extensive the damage would be in terms of limits on federal money imposed to punish them for remaining sanctuary cities.
Mark, back in the 70s, the federal government took away funding from states that wouldn't get in line with the 55 speed limit. So that there is a precedent for this.
And even more recently, the federal government basically forced all the states to raise the drinking age to 21. So, but Juan is right that there are limits that the courts have set on the federal government's using the power of the purse. Although, when you get these grants, for instance, these Justice Department grants that they can cut off and will, they say that the city or county or whatever has to be in compliance with all federal laws in order to get the money. So it's not really an issue of we, the federal government, want you to do X, Y, and Z, and we're making you do it. It's more a question of the federal government telling you you are violating federal law, and therefore you don't get the money. So this is a little bit different example than the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I think it's going to be interesting how this plays out. And it's not just going to be money, because if denying the money isn't enough, then the Justice Department will sue some of these jurisdictions the same way, or sort of the mirror image of what Obama did in suing Arizona for trying to help enforce immigration laws.
We've been hearing so much about this infrastructure bill, trillion-dollar infrastructure bill that President Trump wants very much, and it made me wonder, if you're in a sanctuary city and you have one of these projects that they want to put through, will that money be withheld as part of that? Juan, what do you think?
Well, again, I just go back to the law as it's written currently. You can't do that. You'd have to say that it has some relationship to the area in which you believe that the local government is violating the federal law. So if you were saying we're going to build a highway or a bridge, I don't see it. You can't even do that in terms of criminal justice monies unless the program is specifically about illegal immigrants, undocumented people. So it's that kind of limit that's put in place. I mean, what we see here, I think, is the start of what's going to be a very tense standoff, I think, between many of the big cities with their Democratic mayors who back the sanctuary city status And from their perspective, what they say is it is defensible, it improves the quality of law enforcement in their cities, because you have people who don't have papers who will now talk to police, deal with police without fear that their neighbors or relatives may be deported once their immigration status is known to the police.
Yeah, if I could make a comment on that, Martha. Sure. Juan is right that this is the beginning of a tense standoff, but there is absolutely no evidence that having a sanctuary policy helps policing. And in fact, they've actually looked at jurisdictions where they instituted cooperation with federal immigration authorities, and there was no drop in, for instance, reporting of domestic violence. There was no drop in Hispanic reporting of crime. So this is an urban myth, quite frankly. There's no evidence whatsoever, because the police make clear that if you're a witness or reporting a crime, they're not interested in your immigration status. It's when they arrest people, scan their fingerprints when they're booked in, then if there's a hit on immigration's computer back in Washington, they hand them over to immigration if they ask for them. That's all that the Immigration Service is asking of these cities.
Yeah,
I just think the police know best, Mark, and the police have said very clearly they think it's a hindrance to good policing and law enforcement in our country.
They're police chiefs appointed by politicians.
And
that's
others.
the thing.
We got to go. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Mark and Juan, good to have you here tonight. So tonight, anger over new reports from a Democratic super PAC announcing the best outcome against President Trump is one of scorched earth. Dana Perino joins us on that, plus the dramatic executive actions anticipated from President Trump that would halt Syrian refugees into the United States indefinitely. Charles Krauthammer joins us with his thoughts on that this evening. Before reaction from CARE's Hassan Shibli, his organization none too pleased with this coming action. We'll be back with more 100 Days after this.
Are you at all concerned it's going to cause more anger among Muslims around the world?
There's plenty of anger right now. How can you have more?
Breaking tonight, President Trump could be one step closer to implementing one of his most controversial ideas, what he calls an extreme vetting process for refugees entering the United States from several Muslim countries. The president is expected to sign an executive order any day now, a draft of which calls for a 120-day suspension of all refugee admissions, a permanent halt on acceptance of refugees from Syria until that has more clarity on it, and the blocking of visas for nationals from 7 countries across the Middle East and Africa for now. So just last night, the president was asked what message this might send to the Muslim world.
Are you at all concerned it's going to cause more anger among Muslims around the world?
There's plenty of anger right now. How can you have more?
You don't think it'll exacerbate the problem?
David, I mean, I know you're a sophisticated guy. The world is a mess. The world is as angry as it gets. Well, you think this is going to cause a little more anger?
Joining me now, Dr. Charles Krauthammer, syndicated columnist and Fox News contributor. Charles, good evening. Great to have you here tonight.
Good to be here.
So what's your reaction to that exchange that we just played with President Trump?
I think Trump is right. I mean, the left has been arguing, Obama, during his 8 years, argued that we mustn't do anything to anger people abroad, particularly the Muslim world, and he cited Guantanamo, a great recruiting agent. That's nonsense. It wasn't used at all as a recruiting agent. 9/11 preceded any of this. That was the height of anger. So I think the president's right. We don't calibrate our position by calculating how much anger it will cause. If we do that, we will end up doing nothing. We have to calibrate our response by what makes sense to keep Americans safe. Now, I think what's happening here is the president's trying to walk back the ban on Muslims, the blanket ban that he announced after the San Bernardino massacre. That clearly is unconstitutional, it's untenable, and it would anger many governments who are cooperating with us, Muslim governments, in the fight against the jihad. So they've ended up with this sort of chopped up policy where some countries, people from some countries that are in turmoil with jihadist movements, like Libya, you showed it on the map, the red countries, Libya, Yemen, Iraq, all of those, we're going to reconsider our policies and suspend the visas for now. The only thing that seems to me to be permanent, there'll be a reconsideration for 30 days from other countries, but that just means we're going to look at the policy as any new administration would. But what looks to me to be more permanent now is the suspension of Syrian refugees and the reduction of the total number from 100,000, which was the Obama objective, to 50. That, I think, is serious, and that is unlikely to be reversed.
I mean, it cuts that number in half, as you point out. And when you go through the pieces of this idea, though, in this draft, Charles, I mean, many of them are things that already exist in immigration law. You know, for example, in order to protect Americans, we must ensure that those admitted to the country don't bear hostile attitudes towards our country and its founding principle. When you look into immigration law, most of these are things that anyone coming into this country has to sign as it is. You know, a lot of this goes back to the border idea that the president is raising. You know, let's enforce the laws that are already on the books.
Yeah, I think it's quite ridiculous how the left has attacked the idea that if you ask people questions when they want to immigrate, when they want to be a part of our country, such as, and we used to do this in the 50s and the 60s, do you support the violent overthrow of the government of the United States? That's a perfectly legitimate question. If your answer is yes,
then
you're not coming in here.
Exactly.
Now, you know, you may lie about it, but you may have a history that would imply that you do want to do that, in which case, go home. You know, if you want to overthrow a government, overthrow your own government, not ours. So I don't think that those questions, which are essentially ideological, are illegitimate. But I do think there was one thing in this directive, this executive order that we hear is coming probably Saturday, that was interesting and could be alarming. He's instructing the Department of Defense to set up safe zones in Syria.
Right.
Well, that was a good idea 5 years ago, when we had control of the skies, the Russians hadn't arrived, and the Assad government hadn't become a puppet of the Iranian government. But that's no longer true. Setting up a safe zone is not going to be something that we can simply say we're going to do and go ahead and do it, like putting up a big apartment building.
Yeah.
That's not what happens.
No, it's a great point.
And I think it might presage a Syria policy that could be dangerous.
That jumped out at me as well. And you asked the question, you know, where is that safe zone? Where do you find that spot in this world? Charles, thank you very much. Great to have you with us tonight.
My pleasure.
So with the debate raging over taking refugees from the Middle East, a horrific story out of Sweden has now gotten international attention. 3 men have been arrested there, accused of raping a young woman and streaming it live on Facebook for 3 hours. Now the nationality of 2 of those suspects is coming into question. For more on this, we go to Trace Gallagher in our West Coast newsroom. Trace.
Martha, this happened about 40 miles outside of Stockholm. Police there got several calls on Sunday morning from people who claimed they were watching a Facebook live stream of 2 men sexually assaulting a woman who appeared to be unconscious or intoxicated. When police arrived at the apartment, they found 3 men and a woman. All 3 men were arrested. A Swedish newspaper says the 2 men accused of the rape are Afghan immigrants. The other man, who's charged with not stopping the assault, is Swedish. The nationalities of the accused are controversial because Sweden, like Germany and other European countries, is having a fierce debate over immigrants and refugees. And in Sweden, this would be the 2nd rape in 3 months involving Afghan immigrants. In October, 5 Afghans were convicted of raping a teen, yet they were not deported, and only one was given, or they were only given a year in jail. In this latest case, the problem is the alleged crime was broadcast to a Facebook group consisting of several hundred people. Many of them reported seeing the rape, and some may have recorded it, but so far nobody's turned over a copy. So police haven't seen the alleged crime. And legal experts in Sweden say that makes it tough to prosecute. Listen.
There are gaps in the legislation that in principle allow this kind of publishing. Possibly it could be a crime according to the law section of calumny or the act of illegal violence depiction. But as I said, the gaps in the legislation unfortunately make it difficult to prosecute.
And there reportedly was a 2nd live stream where the suspects tried to force the alleged victim into claiming she had not been raped. Martha.
Brutal. Trace, thank you very much. So joining me now with reaction to all of this, the draft that has been circulated, that we think the president may bring out something that looks quite a bit like this. Hassan Shibly is Chief Executive Director at the Florida chapter of the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Good to have you with us tonight. Good evening, sir. What are your thoughts, as you look at what you've heard so far in this plan? What do you think?
Trump's policies are bad for America. They simply appear to be amongst the first of many discriminatory policies that disadvantage America first and foremost and hurt our fellow human beings after that. One of the greatest Americans who passed away not long ago, Steve Jobs, is the son of a Syrian immigrant. Where would America be and what would it be missing had we not had Steve Jobs immigrate to America?
But the point of this draft, and if you go through the language and read it, it's not about permanently keeping people out of the country. And it doesn't affect people who are in the country already. What it talks about is trying to vet properly. So, under the scenario that you just presented, nothing would have prevented that person from getting into this country.
And that's exactly right. And this scenario that we've had, it works. Refugees are the most vetted people in the world. It often takes them about 24 months of vetting before they're able to come to America. And that's why statistically you have a lot less crime, murder, and even terrorism coming out of refugees. In fact, statistically, the chances of being killed by a refugee is 1 out of 3.6 billion with a B out of the Cato Institute.
We've all seen the issues that are happening in Europe. We have seen why there's so much concern to make it more difficult for the flood of refugees to go through. And everyone is sympathetic to the needs of good, people who want to leave their country, and we all understand why they want to leave those countries. But, just going through some of this draft language, it says, that people would be blocked, have their access blocked if they engage in acts of bigotry, hatred, honor killings, violence against women, and persecution on the basis of religion, race, gender, or sexual orientation. Can you agree that you would not want people?
Yeah, that's already there, of course, but it goes far beyond that. It completely bans Syrian refugees and potentially completely bans any immigrants. Yes, for a time.
Until the immigration process is refined to a point where the administration feels it's satisfactory. I mean, the underlying crux here is that you want to keep people out of the country who want to do harm or who are potential criminals. That's what everyone's talking about here.
And
whether
we all
it's the
agree with
southern
that.
border or whether it's coming from Middle Eastern countries, it's the same aim, is to keep people safe in their country. Doesn't every country want to do that?
Right, but these policies aren't aimed at that. What they actually do is not make America safer. They just promote fear and hatred. The chances of being killed by your clothes burning is greater than your chances of being killed by an immigrant. The chances of you being run over by a railway car is greater than the chances of being killed by an immigrant. Immigrants don't pose a threat to America.
That's precisely why you have protective measures to protect from those things as much as we possibly can as well.
And we support the basic protective measures, absolutely.
These issues as much as you possibly can as well.
Absolutely. I just think Trump's position is too extreme, yes. But these positions are too extreme. And it's important we don't lose who we are as Americans. America's a nation built on diversity, built on immigrants, and we have to remember our enemies can never defeat us. We can only defeat ourselves if we allow fear and hate to turn us against each other and be willing to promote discriminatory policies. And I think these policies go too far.
People from entering the country. So we'll leave it there.
Trump was on the record. Trump was on the record saying he wants to ban all Muslims. So it's scary. But thank you for having me. God bless you. God bless America.
Thank you for being here. So tonight, new reports of a Democratic Party that is vowing to stop at nothing to block President Trump's agenda. One notorious super PAC director even floating impeachment as the only solution. Dana Perina joins us on how that strategy could set Democrats back even further. Coming up straight ahead. So developing tonight, there are new reports surfacing on how the Democrats plan to deal with the Trump administration. Immediately after the election, there were some suggestions that it was going to be an era of bipartisanship. That came as pundits pointed out that Democrats had not only lost control of the White House, the Senate, and the House in the last 6 years, they were also in worse shape in state government.